being able to bring a comprehensive and like complete view of the customer is becoming a more important need to move and like make decisions. Can we all agree this is what the customer is saying?
Here we are. We are back again, and today we are talking to Hannah Shamji, who is a customer researcher, LinkedIn extraordinaire, publishes tons of great content, which is how Hannah and I got connected. So, Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Zach. Really glad to be here. I'm excited to chat.
Oh, me too. And so, where I'd love to start is just we'd love to learn a little bit about you. So, can you tell us maybe about some previous roles that you've had, and then what you're doing now in the world of customer research?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been in the world of qualitative research for 12 years now. The past six have been in the marketing space. So I actually started, I have a bachelor's in psychology, then I jumped into a master's in public health, and I was like fully bought into the idea that I was going to use research to impact population level health and like behavioral change, driving health outcomes. I was very sold on that. Got a job working in government healthcare. I was at Cancer Care Ontario. Um, the change is so slow in the healthcare system. Like it was just painfully slow to see the actual outcomes of the research. So much bureaucracy and red tape. And so I kind of thought I'm going to swing like complete opposite direction and thought, well, instead of trying to have impact change to many, I'm going to do like one-on-one. And so I picked up kind of my psych background and I did a 3-year training to become a psychotherapist. And I thought, well, okay, one-to-one, I'm going to be able to see change. I'm going to have like more of my hands into kind of driving outcomes. And by the end of that training, I had already found and sort of fell in love with marketing. So I never built a practice. That was the plan the whole time, to have my own psych practice, but never went through with that. And then marketing felt like this really nice marriage and harmony of the two worlds. So it wasn't like one-to-one. It wasn't trying to affect many. It was like business outcomes and studying a really small group of representative customers and helping understand them at a depth that could drive business decisions and business outcomes. And of course, like speed is so important in business. So I can actually enjoy the application of the research and implementation of it and support companies with that. And so that's the work that I do now. I work with a lot of B2B tech companies. I think B2B mostly because it's just easier to realize that the sales and the buyer journey is complicated. Like there's so many levels and layers, so many people involved. So it's a quicker grab for them to say, hey, we actually have a lot of blind spots. Let's find the sort of path of least resistance to drive sales and connect with more customers. And so I'll come in and kind of surface or sort of service different parts of the business depending on what the need is. And yeah, mostly with I'm always tying the research to a business outcome there. But that's kind of my like trajectory, a very unplanned, total surprise for me, but a really nice pull on a lot of the psychotherapy techniques, especially with interviews and asking questions and kind of digging under the surface of customers. And then the driving outcomes and kind of the academic view of behavioral change. All of it kind of fell really nicely into the marketing world.
And I can see how that would lend itself super well to working in qualitative research, working in marketing. A lot of the folks I've talked to in the past, they point to psychology as a very strong driver of, producing great marketing or producing great business outcomes. But I think you're the first person I've talked to who actually has a legit academic background in it. And actually, I'd like to get your thoughts on this before we kind of jump into, research broadly. How do you see your background and understanding of kind of consumer psychology or human psychology? How does that play into your practice, practically speaking? Like, how does it
Yeah.
change how you interview folks? How does it change what you look for at the beginning? I'd love to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that I think the study, so my bachelor's in psych was great with a lot of theory, but the actual application of the psychotherapy training of how do you actually kind of surface opportunities to change within an individual, that's where it really, really came to life for me. And the application is primarily with interviews, but honestly, with even with client conversations, right? So a lot of times, founders, leaders, executives, they know what they don't want and they know very loosely what they do want, right? It's this like classic, I feel like it's like a classic kind of great visionary, not great manager of they kind of can tell you when they see it, right? If it is what they want, and they might not outline those specifications beforehand. Um, so a lot of that kind of psychotherapy, psychology is really helpful to kind of slip under the surface. How do you get people to tell you the truth and to articulate their preferences and their actual sort of personality and behaviors and actions without asking for it directly, because people will absolutely not tell you the truth. That surface level answer is it's never it. And the layers beneath that become so real when you are doing like psychotherapy, right? Like people will tell themselves so many stories and they will believe those stories, and then the reality of how they live is like completely different. And it's very much, I think, a part of just being a social person. Like we have a who we are and how we are, and then we have an image and an impression of how we show up. And it's kind of governed by what we want others to see and what we also want to believe about ourselves, right? Like that is a very stubborn wall. So unpacking that and kind of gracefully getting underneath those layers is it's not an easy or intuitive task. um, a lot of this helped with that, like picking on words and language. Those are sort of the windows into how people really think. And they are so rehearsed. You know, we have such an attachment to our own sort of lexicon and vocabulary. And so a lot of times people will say something that carries a lot of meaning. Like you can take a single sentence and start really, really stripping it. I would say that's really the biggest. So in interviews and surveys as well, how to ask questions that really are stripped of bias, but still kind of cut to the heart of what you want to know. It's a lot of that, asking the right questions and knowing how to pull for more information. Those are the two bigger buckets, I would say.
Your point about human behavior, where people will say one thing and then do another, is something I've consistently heard talking to folks in the research space. I've heard stories about you ask someone, "Hey, it sounds like your current solution, current thing you're doing, not really working for you," and they'll tell you all day long, "Yeah, it's painful. I don't like it. It's too expensive. It's this. It's that." And then when you follow up with, "Would you like to change to this new product or service?" They say, "No, I think I'm going to stick with my current solution." And of course, that's an inherently human thing. I think we
Right.
all do this to a certain extent, as you said. But it is a complicating factor of research. And so your points about being able to sort through the layers and the get to the actual insight, or the core of what people believe and actually do, uh, is a challenge. But your background is just incredible when it comes to kind of sifting through that. So it's super interesting to hear about. I'd like to kind of broaden the scope a little bit and talk about customer research in general.
Yeah.
You have a ton of great content on LinkedIn about what businesses get wrong about customer research, about why it comes up short sometimes. So I'd like to start with saying, kind of give me the state of customer research in 2024. So what you're seeing as a consultant who's performing research, what are the problems that businesses are trying to solve? What are you hearing from customers, if anything has changed in the last year or so? So I know that's a very broad topic, but if you could just give us give us kind of the overview of where you're seeing things this year, and then we can dive deeper from there.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think the appetite for research is growing largely out of need. Um, Initially, it was maybe more a buzzword, and now I think with AI really, entering that conversation more, it's just so much easier to execute and move. And that makes it really important to differentiate and stand out. There's more noise to cut through. And so that relationship that you have with the customer, that intel is something that no other company will have, right? Like it's your private relationship with them. And that's not industry report, it's not a market trend, right? It's not widely available. So the more that you can tap into that and really unlock what is driving them, how are they thinking, how are they operating, this becomes like a really kind of treasure trove of intel that you can use to drive business decisions. So I think that need is becoming a bit louder. I still think it's a ways away. I mean, I'm definitely talking to more folks who are recognizing a need for research, and specifically, I would say in the marketing space. Marketing leaders, I'm finding, are the ones that I've actually talked to a few who have like just stepped into a role of like head of marketing or director of digital marketing. And it, as kind of a new addition to the company, they're looking to other teams that are customer facing to learn about the customers. And it very quickly becomes clear that like everyone has a different view that serves their particular role. There's no cohesive understanding, or there's like a very superficial layer that whether it's product or sales has just not really been able to crack. And so a big piece for them is to like cut underneath that layer and get really deeper into the sort of underbelly. Um, I think that it's becoming more prominent, but I would still say that the discussion around research is less. It's more a need based. Something else is triggering a need for alignment and a 360-degree view of the customer and a complete picture that doesn't exist before. Research is really the process to get there, but it's a business need that's being more that I think is being more exposed, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. You touched on a ton of great topics there, all of which I'd love to dive into. The point that you made about the customer relationship and your unique customer insights being kind of a treasure trove is something that I've found myself saying as I work in kind of at the intersection of customer research and AI. And as a marketer, I see how so many things that we do in marketing are getting commoditized. It's easier than ever to write a blog. It's easier than ever to put
Yeah,
together a website. Video content, photo content. All of that is easier than ever to create. And so, what is going to differentiate you is
hmm,
a really deep understanding of your customers and the ability to integrate those insights into your customer facing assets,
yeah,
to your product. That's how I think businesses are really going to stand out in 2024 and beyond. And so to hear you kind of echo that, and I swear
yeah.
we didn't arrange this beforehand. To hear you echo that, it really resonated with me because I think that in the same way that I don't know in the beginning of kind of the Web 2 era, like user data was the treasure trove. I think that
Mm,
the new treasure trove or the new kind of user data, it's less about what people are clicking on and it's more about what
mhm.
they're thinking and feeling and their unique insights that you can leverage within your business. So I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, but that was a very strong point for me.
Yeah, it just sort of reminded me of I put up a post the other day on LinkedIn, and um, a friend of mine who's also like brilliant in the marketing space, Katie Thies, um, she wrote a comment of like slow is fast. And I really think that that is like such a brilliant way of capturing. Like it really is the new fast to just sort of slow down, gather the intel so that you can like fire and aim more precisely. And because the ability to like sort of execute and fire and move is really it's just becoming easier to do. That precision is so much more important. Can you do it with like minimized risk, um, and less resources? And the more accuracy you have on the market and what they need and how they're thinking, the more precisely you can meet them, and connect with them.
Your point about accuracy and precision leads straight into the next part of your response I wanted to dig deeper on, which was it's a business need that is driving research within these organizations. And as you said, they think of it more as business need first, and then what is the tool that I use to solve for that need? It's research. So they're not coming out the other way saying research is a good thing to do in and of itself, and downstream we will get these benefits to our business. But for now, as long as they're ending up at doing research and understanding the customer better, we're happy with that. What I'd like to understand is what are the business needs that you're seeing in 2024 or in the last several quarters of your work? I think from my perspective, we know that we're kind of in the era of instead of grow at all cost, it's get profitable at all costs,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
cut burn at all costs, things like this. And so I'd love to know what businesses are looking to solve when they come to you, and how that relates to what we just talked about being more accurate and more precise and more kind of targeted towards your core customer in your business.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest one that I'm seeing is alignment and consensus. Something like messaging, everybody wants to weigh in on because they all have, and rightfully so, right? Everybody has their own view and their own sort of sliver of customer insight, product, commercial, strategy, creative. They all have their own touch points, but it's very tied to their specific team. And so being able to bring a comprehensive and like complete view of the customer is becoming a more important need to move and like make decisions. Can we all agree this is what the customer is saying, as opposed to a back and forth of like whose perspective is right? And it's like none and all, right? Because they all kind of own a small piece of the pie. Um, so I think that's one, consensus and alignment. And I think that's sort of, I saw it seeding a little bit. Like I was initially having conversations with prospects and then clients around how this was a surprising, like a fallout benefit, that they were able to move and make decisions faster with the research. And now it's something that folks are coming to me for because they're sort of at the helm of like, we really need to move. I know what needs to be done. I just need to be able to validate it, and not be seen as a biased perspective on the team. So that's one. Two, which is a little easier, I think, is just a when there is a need to sort of fix a leak, a known leak. I was working with a client at the beginning of the year that had a huge like surge of anxiety, that a ton of website visitors, a real big anxiety that was stopping them from actually making the buy decision. And so it was just a very clear opportunity for us to dive deep and say, well, what's happening, right? Like before assuming we know how to fix it, what's really going on, and what are the opportunities? What are the nuances? What's the language? And that's it. That's another one that I think is a really, it's a quicker grab for folks, like high churn, or sales aren't converting, or there's some kind of stopgap there. Um, but and the other one is more just kind of having an initial baseline. So I also offer training for companies that are like pre-product market fit, where it makes sense. It would actually be sort of, it wouldn't be productive for them to bring an outside researcher in because the gap between learning and doing needs to be really tight because they're just constantly pivoting and iterating. So learning how to build the skill is more important. And I think that's also a space of like, it's less through the angle just of research and more, we need to validate our vision. That being a really important piece. And to something you mentioned earlier, I actually really like the fact that folks aren't coming in from the research angle and they're coming in more from the business, I think it emphasizes the fact that research should always be tied to the business. Like it should never be, let's do research, because that mindset will strip you away from utility and need and really thinking about a lean approach. Like, do you already have insights that you can leverage? So I'm very much of the mind of like, let's not talk about research. Let's talk about the business. What does the business need? And then the research is just the mechanism to get us more clarity, more confidence, and more conviction, as opposed to starting with the research and then having to prove the value and find a home for it afterwards, which often that home is like sadly tucked away in a Google Drive and nobody really sees it. So I'm much more of like the, a counterintuitive approach of like, yes, I'm a researcher, but do not do research. That's kind of my hook, I guess.
Oh, I love that, and it reminds me of a post I saw from you on LinkedIn, which was I have it in my notes here. Research goes to die in a Google folder somewhere. I think it was something like that, and that's something I wanted to ask you about. So I love the perspective on, hey, let's start with the business case first, and we kind of we kind of work backwards into,
Yeah.
research is the tool to just solve the business problem. You do your work, uh, you talk, do your customer interviews, you produce some results. How do you get businesses to get on board with those results? So I guess it's two questions. One is kind of, what do your deliverables look like? I think I remember you saying something about creating essentially a resource that businesses get. But resources are great. I have a dozen resources sitting in my Google Drive that I haven't opened in 6 months. So do you do any sort of coaching around kind of aligning the business around the insights as well? I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak to your first point about buy-in. Um, I like to think of it like getting a good night's sleep starts with like how your day went. It's very similar. Like getting buy-in on your findings starts with how you tee up the conversation. So I am thinking about buy-in from the jump. Typically, if a company's coming to me, they have buy-in on there is a gap or a lack of knowledge or a need to validate. So that's a really important anchor for me to pivot the research around. It's never here are the insights, it's here are the answers to your questions. So the more clarity I have on those questions, I'm simply answering them. I'm not kind of throwing everything and the kitchen sink into the conversation. I use those as avenues to then get buy-in. So I will actually start a presentation. It will never just be a resource, it will always be a presentation that I'll do internally to the stakeholders and then company-wide, sometimes department-wide, depending on where they want to sort of socialize and evangelize the insights. But I will always start with, here's where you wanted to go, so let's go there, right? It's not, this is what the research is saying. It's under the umbrella of answering their business objectives, their questions. So I will always include recommendations. I didn't when I first started because I wanted to draw a really clear line between like, I'm not going to affect the business, like you do the business and I'll do the research. And then I was just getting all of these questions like, well, how do you think we can implement or action on this? Because now suddenly you are the expert on the customer. So I've leaned into that and I give recommendations and it opens out a very different discussion where we then have a discussion about the business and I become sort of this like representing the customer voice in the conversation. And so I take that thread and really carry it forward. Part of the resources that I provide are actual feedback on assets. So if it's like a landing page that they wanted to impact or a website or a social media ad, I will actually kind of weigh in on where and how to edit it. And then this sets up the stage to offer kind of a sort of a consultative approach where I would sit in a room once a team has made changes based on the research and weigh in as, okay, let's talk about those changes. Because I have all of this other knowledge of their customer, I can speak to it a bit more freely and sort of fluidly. So it becomes this feedback loop of like, they can send me things, or I can hop on a call and kind of represent the customer voice, bring them into the room, um, and really be that sort of trusted voice. A lot of it though is positioning. I've not ever had a client kind of push back on the buy-in, and I think that once they agree to be a client, I've positioned it in a way that it's very clear that you either will be confirmed or you will be challenged, but we're going to figure out what is actually happening, what's the lay of the land. So the appetite on those calls are always enthusiastic. Like they're very excited, very receptive. Um, and I think that the buy-in piece is more at the outset, in my experience, of like getting folks even to buy in on the need for research in the context of the business. Once they're kind of through the door, then I find that setting that up and kind of managing client expectations along the way is it's much more downhill. It's much smoother sailing.
That makes a lot of sense. I have two questions. So one is, what is the who is the person you're generally working with within the organization? Is it head of marketing? Is it head of sales, or does it vary?
A couple different buckets. So in a smaller company, more startup-y, I'm working typically with founders, CEO level. And in other instances where the company is a little bit more built out, it will be in the marketing. So head of marketing, director, VP of marketing, that kind of category. Um, those are the, I'm just thinking, no, I think those are the two main buckets.
That makes a lot of sense. My other question is, it sounds like you essentially become the expert on the business's customer and become the voice of the customer within the organization in those meetings where you're reviewing ad creative, and you can raise your hand and say, from the customer's perspective, here are my recommendations. How do you help, say, the head of marketing, or at a startup, the founder, become that expert themselves? Because ideally you're not going to be in every one of those meetings forevermore, right? You have other things to do. So what does that knowledge transfer look like, and what does the kind of coaching look like to get those key people within the organization to internalize those learnings about the customer so that they can advocate for the customer in those marketing meetings, sales meetings, every other meeting?
Yeah, it's an important question. When I first started exploring this space, I was a little bit intimidated because it feels like a really big, meaty task. And I think it's best kind of broken out into smaller chunks. So, really baby steps, like encouraging a wider presentation to the company, right? In that way, you're seeding. I'm not just presenting the research findings back to the stakeholders of the project, I'm presenting them in a broader lens. It opens up discussion and opportunities for the founder to then sort of stamp and say, this is the lens and insight we want to bring into our thinking across teams. Um, so the power of a second presentation is really great, right? We get buy-in from the CEO, the founder, executives to team me up to then share insights. And now everyone is aware of those insights. So that presentation is tailored to be kind of setting like, this is a North Star in terms of the customer for the company. And with that, they all get a resource that I call a customer brain. And so it's designed in a way that is accessible for those teams. So the more I know about how they're going to use the insight, the better I can shape and kind of mold it. So whether it's a one pager, is it a few like audio snippets? Is it a sort of map of the insights? Like whatever that breakdown is, really kind of bite-sized, usable chunks. Because they're teed up for it, there is a readiness and an interest in diving into the actual insights and data. In terms of building onto that, I'll also go on and like train teams, maybe do a round of research with them so they're involved in the process. And ideally, you have kind of a cross-functional opportunity. So like a marketing, a sales, a customer success. So there's no ownership as much as there are like champions of the customer and folks that are interested enough to like, I want to sort of wave this customer flag in conversations. So you start seeding it out that way. Another layer to that is adding a Slack group where it's all about like sharing insights. What did you learn? And it initially can feel like a bit of a dump, and it sort of needs to be. You need to like kick up the gears to get folks flowing, thinking about the customer, sharing learnings across the team before you can start to think about doing something with those insights. I've also worked with like creating a bit of a database. So how do you take insights and now make meaning from them? That's another exercise that I've done and taught to companies. But it's really this very like layered approach, getting everyone on board, getting buy-in, getting interest enough to engage with the data and start asking the right questions, getting it on top of mind in like the something like a Slack group. So it's regular language and you're hearing it across a kind of a cross-cutting dialogue. And then how do you use and leverage those insights? It sort of starts to pull all the corners of the companies have tons of insight anyway. So even with the Slack group, kind of a regular cadence, maybe it's bi-weekly, and setting up meetings that make sense for the right players to share insights, share learnings. It's really this top of mind, these kind of pillars that then explode opportunities for companies to take their own shape in how they want to build more culture around research and validation. But I start with some really strong pillars to create like a baseline of activities, and then the right sort of resources that sit on top of those to then for them to iterate on and get better and more and refine them as they go.
Your point about turning insights into an ongoing conversation within the organization so that people are sharing them regularly in Slack and also consuming them regularly, I
Mm-hmm.
think is so key. And it really helps differentiate, I think, how people picture the results of research being packaged, which is you did all this research, I get an 87-page PDF that I open one time, and then my brain melts, and then I never look at it again because it's completely overwhelming. What you're saying, it echoes what I've also heard talking to, I don't know if you know Bianca Johnston. She's
Mm-hmm.
fabulous researcher, also who is very prolific on LinkedIn. And what I'm hearing from both of you is this focus on making the research digestible,
Yeah.
making it something that pops up day to day. So maybe here's some audio snippets, here's an
Yeah.
infographic, here's a map, here's a Slack channel that's just
Yeah.
always popping with more insights, people sharing notes from customer calls, what have you. I think that is such a brilliant way to think about how research becomes kind of ingrained into
Yeah.
an organization. And it shouldn't be some dusty PDF that sits on a shelf. It should be everywhere all the time and top of mind for everybody.
Yeah.
You really want it to
Totally.
become part of the fabric of the organization.
Yeah. I will add to that that to not kind of make I think when like there's a line between like flashy and functional that I think is really important to bear in mind with like as much as I want and I would love more folks to be interested and engaged in research. Sometimes a heavier, like rich, well done report is really helpful. There are instances where I've put together like a meteor document, but because I've organized it the right way that it is kind of digestible and easy to go through, I get really, really positive feedback. And a lot of teams go through it, which means they get a very deep insight. So I think there's an important line of like, it's really catering to the company and understanding their appetite and their interest and their needs so that you can slide into that. Like looking at like these huge consulting companies, right? Like the McKinseys and the Bains and the Booz Allen, like they do create these like giant reports and they're paid like tremendously for it. So I think there is utility for a stake in the ground and a really like critical reference document, like a source of powerful truth that any new employee can now reference and it becomes like mandatory reading. And those layers on top are really exciting and important too. But I'm always very much like anchored in utility, right? Like the excitement flame will often fizzle out. But what do they actually need? And so setting up those deliverables, like I will customize the deliverables based on what they need, and then also sprinkle in what I think they need. And having that deeper resource, I think, is always beneficial as like a reference point. When you set up and parse out the research correctly, I've found that folks want to dig into the details. It isn't a like, okay, let me just get a little bit and then go. It's like, oh, I want to understand. I want to weigh in. I want to make better decisions because I have this like right here. Um, and then it becomes more fun. It becomes an interest in like really diving deep. But there's a time and a place for all of that. So a lot of it is doing research on the company, right, on the client, on their needs, so that you can meet them wherever they are, and then also tug them a little bit further down.
That was actually what I was just about to say, is that one of the strongest themes that I've gotten during our conversation is that you do this really fabulous job of understanding your customer, no surprises there, and being able to meet them where they are, and then teeing up the research in terms that are going to really resonate with them. So to your point, and I'm not throwing any shade at full size research reports, but to your point, when you deeply understand them and the business problems they're trying to solve and kind of where they're at in their organization, and then craft your resource accordingly, all of a sudden that becomes something that everybody wants to dive into,
Yeah,
instead of some, I don't know, one size fits all kind of, hey, I
yeah,
put the same report together for everybody and I kind of just filled in the blanks for your particular company. But that
totally.
sounds like something you uh, really take to heart, and it's clear how that kind of manifests throughout your work, at every stage with these organizations. So I think that's a key takeaway for people here is, uh, it's kind of a meta point, but as a customer researcher, you really need to understand your customer before you do the research.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, totally.
Um, so we're getting ready to wrap up here. There's one more topic I wanted to dig into, which you mentioned all the way back at the beginning, which was just kind of the proliferation of AI, both in marketing, business in general. But I'd also love to know, do you have any views on the intersection of AI and research, kind of what the promises or pitfalls of that might be? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a space I'm diving deeper into and trying to build more models that I can use and sort of test in my business. I think a really key opportunity is, and one that I've seen some like play with already, is the analysis component. There's a layer of analysis where you sort of quantify the qualitative insight that is very easy, I think, to feed through. And I'm going to put easy in brackets. I mean, it's an easier functionality, or in quotes, it's an easier functionality to feed through AI. I think there's definitely like it's moving in that direction, and especially this notion of like the fraud, like we all have, if you're analyzing data, you all have like your own internal sort of algorithm, even if it is qualitative, right? Even if it's not like a cluster analysis, or it's taking a cluster analysis and then interpreting it. Um, that I think there's going to be more instances of folks creating a model, like a language model that interprets uh, that level of data the way that you want. You've seen it even with like in politics, like politician speeches and like measuring sentiment and tone and like underlying um, indications of something, preferences. So I think like there's definitely opportunities and sort of threads there that I'm getting more interested in and playing with. Um, the role of the actual researcher, I think, will change a little bit as it is kind of in all of the fields. But I think that's kind of one of the first points to grab, maybe the analysis piece, and also the implementation of the insights, right? Like pulling from those insights into something like a report or an infographic or whatever it is. These like smaller opportunities embedded in a research process to automate and really kind of collapse into something that is easier to work with and can make you move faster. I know even with like even with a qualitative analysis that you maybe then quantify or do like a max diff analysis or cluster analysis or anything in that kind of like statistical world. Um, Even those like a programs on like Stata or Python or R that help you do that. So I think this is just a deeper extension of that and being able to have a better read on the human conversation and language to be able to pull out and spit out the actual kind of buckets that you want. I think we're very like I'm seeing a few companies that are doing that well. I'll be honest and say I haven't found anything that I trust where the output is something that I'm like, oh, I like this. The instances where I've used ChatGPT for analysis were just like, I just got so many errors. I was like, wasn't there this transcript that said this also? And they were like, oh, yes, sorry, we forgot about that. Or like, we missed that. So there's nothing I've found that has really kind of checked it off for me. And that sort of perked my interest to build something that does that job and start playing more in that area. But I think it's a growing space. I mean, I think it's a huge pitfall of research is how long it takes, and a lot of that is the time in the analysis. So I think there's a huge opportunity and a natural path that's being kind of created there with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like, you know, everybody I talk to in the research space or even research adjacent, like, very customer centric, go to market teams, everybody's trying to figure out how can we use AI to
Right.
do our job better, faster, cheaper. And they also say the other piece that you brought up, which is how do we do our job better, faster, cheaper without this thing blowing up in my face and hallucinating or producing these totally incorrect results? And so
Yeah.
that is the needle that everybody is trying to thread as they evaluate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I love how you said that. Totally.
so I have two quick questions for you as we wrap up here. One is, what advice do you have for business?
Oh, I just lost your audio. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
All right, my phone just decided it's to take over my microphone. So um, so I'll this part will get edited out for sure. Um, so my first rapid fire question is, what advice do you have for businesses who want to be more customer centric? And there's a lot of ways you can go with that. So take that however you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word for me there is want to be more customer centric. I think this is the like the example that comes to mind for me is like sell burgers to people who are hungry. So if there's already a want to be customer centric, I think that's great. Really just finding opportunities to talk to customers, and validating understanding and really sort of pulling insights and a flow of insights back into the company, opening up any existing data, creating things like a Slack channel is going to be really helpful that everybody's pulled in on. So you're building a bit of a customer language, and a prominence in the company. Um, Encouraging kind of that, like even messaging around, what does the customer say about this, and involving that kind of thinking into into conversations. These are kind of like micro ways that you can start sort of seeding, aside from actually doing research and identifying opportunities to dig deeper. And maybe it's upskilling the team on how to do interviews as well. Um, but really, I would say that I would say like making this thinking part of the language, and integrating it, making it more prominent, like thinking about the customer. What is the, is this validated by the customer? Do we know this from the customer? And making that kind of a natural pause before we build, before we act, before we decide, creating that kind of checkpoint. Um, I think that's a really powerful, like it's just very simple, but a very kind of powerful piece to start bringing in, like a yeah, one of these kind of smaller actions that can point to a lot.
That's very well said. Last question is, can you just tell us where folks can find you online? So you have this really fabulous approach to customer research that you laid out today. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are going to want to learn more, and hopefully some of them also want to work with you. So just tell us, how can we find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is probably your best bet. I post 5, 6 times a week. So you can binge my content if you like. You can also access my website there, if you want more information about working with me. I will be posting some like blogs in the future. All of that will be through the website. So LinkedIn is probably your best bet as a kind of starting point.
And I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in customer research to go follow Hannah on LinkedIn. I know that I find myself binging your content every time it comes across the timeline, and highly recommend that others do the same. So, Hannah, thank you so much for being here today. This was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners are learning a ton as well. So, thank you so much, and hopefully, we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. This was a lot of fun. It's definitely my one of my sort of buzzier topics. I really do love talking about all things research. So it was fun to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.